Welcome to the Emotionally Healthy Leader podcast. My name is Rich Villodas. I'm the lead pastor of New Life Fellowship Church here in Queens, New York City. And I'm here as always with Pete Scazzero. Pete is the founder of New Life Fellowship as well as the founder of Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. Now, today we're going to talk about culture and team building. In the book, Emotionally Healthy Leader, Pete, you devote an entire chapter to the subject of culture and team building. And there are many different applications that you give, but we're going to focus today on going back to go forward with your team as a means of creating culture, shaping culture, and building teams. And just to review, you mentioned 4 characteristics of emotionally healthy culture and team building. And this is what you list. You list that work performance and personal spiritual formation are inseparable, that elephants in the room are acknowledged and confronted, that time and energy are invested in the team's personal spiritual development, and the quality of people's marriages and singleness is foundational. So those are the 4 characteristics of emotionally healthy culture and team building. But what we're going to focus on today is really an application of those 4 points using a very powerful and specific tool in the Genogram and going back to go forward. So how does, let's start big picture wise, how does going back to go forward relate to culture and team building?
So this whole concept comes out of a theology that we all come out of families that go back 3 to 4 generations, that sin is passed on from generation to generation. When we come to Christ, we're born again into the new family of Jesus. But discipleship is putting away those sinful patterns of our family of origin and learning to live in a new family of Jesus. Mm-hmm. So when someone joins our team, the reality is who's joining our team is a person that comes from a whole history, going back 3 to 4 generations to the late 1800s. So they're bringing stuff with them, and what's inside of people, whether it's cultural or family, is way deeper than we realize, far deeper than we realize. And I'll give you a little example of this. A woman from Harvard did a big study on the multi-generational transmission of trauma out of the Holocaust, and found that if the parents in the Holocaust, the symptoms of what they were holding in their bodies was not just in their children, but was in the grandchildren, as if they'd lived through the Holocaust, the same way they dealt with whether it was feeling, not feeling, or unable to be intimate. But it's because the grandparents who were in the Holocaust never dealt with it, they simply passed on that into their children and to their grandchildren, that there's this powerful biblical principle of what's not dealt with in one generation gets passed on to the next. So we think of things like slavery and African Americans in this country. It lives in people's bodies. I think of Koreans. I was with some family from our church. We were talking about how the Korean War in 1950s has so shaped their parents and now them as adult children. And this concept of Han is so profound. Again, we think of poverty being passed on, but trauma is passed on from generation to generation. And when we have a team, whether it's volunteers or paid staff, we forget it's not simply, yes, they can do a job or not do a job. It's their person that's more important than anything, and that's impacting their work and their performance.
So what you are advocating for is more than just someone doing a job, getting a job done. This is the entirety of a person experiencing transformation. So at New Life, we use language like it's not just your role, it's your soul, it's not just your gifts, it's your character. In this case here, this is so revolutionary because in the marketplace and in most churches, the question is not who are you and what's happening inside of you. It's more of can you get the job done?
Yes.
And so just in your own story, Pete, and your own journey, what was that shift for you? That it went from can you get the job done to it's not just about getting the job done. It's also about who are you as a person and how are you being transformed by Christ in the process?
I came into this very slowly. I think, again, as we got into emotionally healthy spirituality in 1996, it was more on the discipleship level, working out my personal life. But I began to see and put together the obvious pieces as I was working with people in leadership. And I began to see patterns and behaviors that were illogical. And if you've read even the pop books like Emotional Intelligence 2.0, they talk a lot about how emotional intelligence trumps IQ every time, and giftedness. And I would see that people, for example, may be carrying a message. It's called an introduct in object relations theory, and they carry an internal message called "I'm a loser," "I'm no good," and they may have, or I'm stupid. And so therefore you say something to them and they would interpret it through that lens. And they would hear something far beyond maybe a healthy critique I'd be giving, and suddenly would be highly reactive. Or someone who had a PhD, but if they didn't get the right answer, they had this message, I'm stupid. And this irrationality, and then I began to realize it's not just simply a team doing a simple Myers-Briggs together or doing some team building exercises. There was a lot more going on beneath the surface that was impacting the team functioning and a person's ability to serve Christ in the church.
Yeah. So with the genogram and going back to go forward, one of the core issues here is awareness, self-awareness. And one of the principles that I've heard you talk about in many different contexts is the principle that the further you go up the ladder, a higher position or whatever it is, greater power, greater authority, the more aware you need to be, the more work you need to have done.
Yes.
So just unpack that for me and just have any examples for me with that?
Yeah. In other words, the larger your responsibilities or level of leadership, the greater weight is going to be on your inner life. And so therefore issues will come out that maybe did not come out until you got into that role. So for example, I can think of one fellow who was a pastor of a church. And again, the pressure of that leadership, he found himself falling into porn. His whole family had a history of sex addiction. But he would create situations in the church with the board where he would get rejected and fired. And it wasn't until he got rejected and fired from his last church that I had him talk me through the other times he got rejected and fired. And of course, it was always the board's fault. But he would actually create the conditions to get himself fired because he was more comfortable being rejected than actually having a comfortable relationship with his board. But he couldn't even see it until it actually happened to him 3-4 times, and that happened. I think of others who and it happened to me now a few times, folk got in leadership and the way they dealt with authority figures would be perhaps passive aggressive or like this kind of childish rebellion. I was in the role of like, I was the authority figure and they would be responding to me in such a weird way. And then I realized later they were replaying their family of origin as if I was their father or mother and acting out with me and looking for a way to show I'm not going to let you control me and that it went back to unresolved relationships they had with their father and mother. I have a friend who's a PhD and has done a lot of work in organizations. And I remember him telling me, you don't ever hire someone who's got an unresolved relationship with one of their parents, because eventually it will come out in that workplace with you, if you're the final authority. And I think of people, that's called transference. People transfer to us as authority figures unresolved issues from their families of origin or histories. I think of others examples of a person coming late repeatedly, but they're not just late, they got hit in traffic. It's almost like they want to make a point. Or you ask someone to do A and B, and they do B and C.
So Pete, the genogram is for greater self-awareness and going back to go forward. And one of the outcomes of doing a genogram is really discovering scripts. Just talk a little bit about the role that scripts play in shaping culture and teams.
So again, what we recommend is that that you do a genogram, not simply for yourself, but for your team. So you get a sense of what are the messages that people are carrying internally. We call them scripts. Scripts is almost like an actor has a script, and it's not really the person, but they're acting out a part. What happens is when we live in families where there wasn't a lot of self-awareness, or we weren't encouraged to actually be our unique selves and pushed into adulthood, we end up living scripts out that really are not God's for us. So a script might be, I can't make mistakes. Or I have to always be right. Or I can't be vulnerable. I can't show weakness. I have to always be strong. And so people carry these scripts onto our teams and they're unaware of it, but yet it's controlling their behavior. It's informing your relationships, your plans, your initiatives. And so part of a healthy team, you've got to go back to go forward, and where there's not just being concerned about people's performance, but recognizing that folks have hindrances and blockages that have to be exposed. They need personal development. And what we're trying to do in this podcast here to say, a genogram is one of the best ways to help people get at it easily, not easily perhaps, but at least in a clear way and forcefully.
So there's so many ways you can go. This has multiple layers, but practically for someone who wants to begin integrating something like going back to go forward into creating culture and team building, what do you suggest? How does this fit within like a job description of a person? A couple of suggestions here.
Yeah. Well, first of all, on our website, under www.emotionallyhealthy.org, there's a section called Emotionally Healthy Leader based on the book. And for free, we have one of the sessions from the Emotionally Healthy Relationships course called Genogram Your Family. I want to encourage you can download it for free and look at it. And you can actually do it with your team. And I would encourage you to do so. So that's number one. I think a step to take is look at that or get the Emotionally Healthy Skills 2.0 curriculum off our website and do it. Get into it. I think you want to begin asking questions, not shallow questions, but actually asking questions of people. You want to begin observing and being thoughtful. So, I mean, we ponder. I pray for our team. I think about our team and asking God for insight, but I'm also very observant. So, like, for example, I've noticed a couple of times a person's dressed, they're coming in very disheveled. Often that's coming from somewhere. I know, coming from an abused background, you didn't do dressing, you dressed a certain way, almost carry that with you. But I know it's kind of like being a detective. As things come up, you actually like observant saying, why didn't you say no to that person? Why did you say yes? And when you begin to ask questions, you say, what does that remind you of in the past? Like, why didn't you ask your supervisor a question? Why didn't you say, no, I can't do that? And then you find out it goes back to their family of origin and their history. And so you've always got this lens of our team is a place of discipleship and of healing. And I'm actually growing these folks. And their personal growth is inseparable from the church's or movement's growth. So you're combining both their personal life and their job performance because they're not inseparable.
Sounds like a lot of work, Pete.
It is, Rich. It's a lot of work. That's why, I think we see everything through the lens of formation and discipleship. It is work. It means you're doing your own work first. As you said earlier before we started the podcast, you've got to do this thing first, and it's true. You're not using people to just get a job done. You're actually concerned about their lives and then moving forward. That's why if a person's not teachable and open, you probably don't want them on your team because it'd be very hard to shape them and move them forward.
Yeah. And the way that someone is self-aware in this area, really, it creates now a new culture. Give an example today. You and I had a conversation and to address some gaps that we have in the organization, questions that you're holding. Now, one of my scripts from my family of origin is, you mentioned it, one of them, like, don't make mistakes. I'm the oldest of 5, and so I grew up with, like, if a mistake comes, now this is the script, it's my fault. And so as I'm hearing about, like, you talking about all the gaps in the organization and what we need to address this and that. Now, if I hadn't done my work, so I'm constantly thinking about my genogram and the scripts.
Interesting.
And as you're talking about it, there's a part of me that's going, man, I'm a terrible leader.
That's amazing.
Like, this is my fault. This is my fault. But when I step back, I go, you know what? No, this isn't my fault. I mean, there's only so much I can, but even changes how I even approach the situation. Like, I could spend the next 30 minutes just feeling sorry for myself and living in shame.
Never entered my mind that was going through your mind.
Wow.
I said, because I did not see it like that way at all when we were talking about it. I just thought this is normal church. There's gaps. There's always going to be that. And so I thought you'd be saying, hey, thanks, Pete. Really appreciate that. I'll work on that when I get back from vacation.
But there is that side to it. So there's part of me saying, thanks, Pete. This is great. We want to make some progress here. But there's another part of me saying, man, Rich, you're responsible for these gaps. You're a crappy leader because of this. But if I'm not aware, thankfully for the past decade or so, I've been, seasons of, I'm in my genogram, there's an element of self-awareness. If not, I probably just wallow in shame. So that's why the genogram is so important.
And that helps you then understand people that are working, all the folks working for you, as you're coming to them and pointing things out, how they're going to interpret things in ways that you never even imagined, all coming out of where their family of origin.
Yes, absolutely.
Wow.
So in closing here, what can someone do just to, there's some books here. So just some practical next steps. Let's just start with the books, talk about the course, and then next step there.
No, this book is an older book by Monica McGoldrich. You Can Go Home Again, Reconnecting with Your Family. Very interesting book on genograms. I'm sure it's not in print anymore, but it'd be worth looking at that at some point. Focus Genograms, kind of an in-depth book on intergenerational families. And I mean, genograms is just so profound, questions you can ask on it. Generation to Generation, Edward Friedman, his work, this is a classic rabbi, and he writes about how that every one of us is part of three families. We're part of our family of origin, we're part of the church or synagogue family, and then we're part of our present family, whether you're single, your spouse, and your children. So those three are all interlocked, but that family of origin intersects with the other two in a very significant way.
Well, it seems like EHS, before they talk about the course, I think it's an important thing to note that someone might say, well, this sounds like therapy, we're not therapists, but what EHS does, and what I appreciate about what you do, is integration. So the theology, we're integrating, God is the author of all truth there. So, but just talk about that for folks that are like, I'm not a therapist, but this is really about the work of integration.
Yeah, I'm not either, and we don't want to be therapists, we're equippers and disciplers. And so at New Life, we do have a great relationship with a therapist, a PhD that we do refer people out to, does testing for new staff, and we like his input along the way as we get into territory that's beyond us. But we do serious transformation, and we like to say we do deep discipleship that really changes people. And my final words would be that to see team building as this is the work. It's not just they're getting the work done. They are the work. They're why we're here. And this is in a sense, our 3 and our 12 that we're mentoring and developing for the long range future of the mission of Christ here in our church. And so I would encourage you, this is not an interruption. This is the work, and see it as a gift. And of course, we want people's issues. They're naturally going to emerge. And thank God for that. And I've been learning and growing in this for good 20 years now, and still learning and growing. And it's wonderful and it's joyful. I'm not trying to fix everybody. But I want to do my part to help people grow and mature in Christ.
Yeah. So for more information, the EHS course that we have at New Life and that other churches are doing around the country, there's an actual chapter on going back to go forward. So that's one way to begin to integrate it into the life of your church. If you go on our website, emotionallyhealthy.org, as Pete mentioned, there's a lot of information and articles and things that you've written and resources. So you can check it out there. So Pete, until next time.
Thanks, Rich.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.